Donald Trump thought he could bully Harley Davidson into submission, but what happened next? This isn't just another trade war headline. Harley Davidson just humiliated the President of the United States and flipped the entire fight over American manufacturing on its head. Trump launched tariffs to protect Harley, but instead, those same policies pushed the legendary brand overseas. And now Trump is furious. Will Trump's economic war backfire on the very workers he promised to protect? And what does this mean for your job, your wallet, and the future of American manufacturing? What's happening? It all began when Trump launched an aggressive economic strategy to protect American industries. The move? A 25% tariff on imported steel and a 10% tariff on imported aluminum. The intention was simple: punish foreign producers, revive domestic factories, and bring jobs back to the United States. But trade wars are never one-sided. The European Union responded swiftly and ruthlessly. In retaliation, they slapped a 25% tariff on American motorcycles, targeting none other than Harley Davidson. Overnight, the cost of every Harley shipped to Europe jumped by an average of $2,200. For a company already struggling with declining sales and an aging customer base, this was catastrophic. Harley's financial report showed the damage almost immediately. Export sales to Europe plummeted by over 20% within 1 year of the tariffs taking effect. Profit margins were slashed. Dealerships across Europe reported massive drops in foot traffic, and Harley's share price started slipping. The company's leadership was faced with a grim reality. The very tariffs meant to protect American manufacturers were strangling Harley's ability to compete overseas. The result? A decision that shocked the world and ignited a political firestorm. But Harley's reaction wasn't an act of betrayal, it was an act of survival. And the next move they made would redefine the entire battle. Harley's global escape plan. Harley Davidson wasn't selling out, they were surviving. Faced with skyrocketing production costs and a European market that suddenly became hostile, Harley made a desperate decision: shift production overseas. It wasn't about abandoning America, it was about keeping the brand alive. The math was brutal. Harley Davidson estimated that the European Union tariffs would cost them nearly $100 million per year in lost revenue and added expenses. They couldn't pass those costs on to customers without pricing themselves out of the market, nor could they absorb the losses indefinitely. So Harley announced plans to move some of its production outside the United States to avoid the tariffs. They identified Thailand as a key manufacturing hub for European-bound bikes. This move slashed the added tariff costs and allowed Harley to maintain a competitive price point in Europe. But the backlash at home was immediate. Critics accused Harley of abandoning American workers. Politicians labeled them unpatriotic. Even loyal customers began to question the company's commitment to its roots. What those critics failed to understand was simple: the alternative was worse. Without this global escape plan, Harley Davidson risked losing the entire European market, one of its largest and fastest-growing segments at the time. But survival came at a steep political cost, and that cost would be paid publicly in a brutal feud with the President of the United States. Trump's fury and public attack. No president in American history had ever declared war on Harley Davidson until Donald Trump did. The moment Harley's overseas production plan hit the news, Trump unleashed a fury unlike anything the motorcycle industry had ever seen. He took to Twitter, calling Harley disloyal and accusing them of betraying American workers. Harley Davidson should stay 100% American, he wrote. They made this decision to spite us, and they will be taxed like never before. Trump's rhetoric escalated fast. He called for boycotts of Harley Davidson. He hinted at supporting their competitors. He positioned himself as the defender of American manufacturing, casting Harley as the villain. For a brand that had long been seen as a symbol of American freedom and rebellion, the public attack was devastating. Sales fell even further. Dealerships reported an increase in canceled orders and negative customer feedback. Harley wasn't just losing money, they were losing the very identity that had made them famous. And yet, Harley's leadership stood firm. They issued statements explaining that their decision was about survival, not politics. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Trump's outrage had polarized the company's customer base and amplified their existing struggles. But this wasn't just a public relations nightmare, it was a no-win situation that exposed the cracks in both Harley's foundation and Trump's trade strategy. Harley versus Trump, a no-win situation. By the time the dust settled, it was clear neither Harley Davidson nor Donald Trump had won. Both were trapped in a political and economic battle with no way out. For Harley, the consequences were immediate and painful. They lost significant market share in Europe. Their stock price slid to its lowest point in years. Loyal customers began turning to competitors like Indian Motorcycles, which cleverly capitalized on Harley's struggles by emphasizing their own commitment to American manufacturing. For Trump, the Harley debacle became a symbol of the unintended consequences of his trade war. The tariffs had not protected American jobs. They had driven one of the most iconic American manufacturers to move production offshore. His supporters were divided. Some praised his hardline stance. Others began questioning whether his policies were really helping American workers. In the end, the Harley versus Trump feud wasn't just about one company or one president. It exposed the deeper flaws in America's manufacturing strategy, the fragile balance between patriotism and globalization, and the dangerous consequences of using trade wars as political weapons. But as bad as this political battle was, it was only the beginning. Harley's real struggle, the one that could decide their future, was happening inside their own boardrooms and factories. Harley's vanishing customers. For decades, Harley Davidson wasn't just a motorcycle company, it was a cultural movement. But by the early 2020s, something changed. Harley's most loyal riders, the blue-collar, middle-aged Americans who built the brand into an icon, were aging out of the market. The problem? No one was replacing them. Younger riders weren't buying in, and the reasons were bigger than just price. The average Harley Davidson rider is now over 50 years old. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, that age hovered in the mid-30s. But by 2024, that number had climbed well past 50, and the new generation of riders wasn't interested in picking up where their parents left off. For Generation Z and Millennials, the Harley lifestyle simply didn't resonate. They grew up in a world of smartphones, urban living, climate anxiety, and practicality. The image of a loud, heavy, expensive cruiser didn't fit their idea of freedom. On top of that, the costs were prohibitive. The average price of a Harley had climbed to over $20,000, making it an unattainable luxury for younger, debt-ridden Americans. Instead, new riders turned to cheaper, more practical alternatives: small displacement motorcycles, electric scooters, or public transportation. Harley's core audience was quite literally vanishing, and their strategy to attract a new one was backfiring. Harley Davidson's U.S. sales data showed a decline of over 40% from 2008 to 2018. By 2024, the decline had accelerated and the company was losing its grip on its home market. But the financial damage didn't stop there. The financial freefall. If you want to understand how bad things got for Harley Davidson, just look at the numbers. In the fourth quarter of 2024, Harley reported a jaw-dropping loss of $117 million. That's not just a bad quarter, that's a disaster. For context, in the same quarter of 2023, Harley posted a profit of $26 million. In 1 year, they went from profit to collapse. And it wasn't just about profit margins. Harley's total quarterly revenue plummeted by 35% compared to the previous year. Global motorcycle shipments decreased by 53% year over year. Dealership closures accelerated, with flagship stores in places like Fullerton, California, and Alexandria, Louisiana, shutting their doors for good. Investors took notice. Harley Davidson's stock price, which had already fallen by 65% over the past decade, hit new lows in early 2025. Once seen as an unshakable American icon, Harley Davidson was now viewed by Wall Street as a sinking ship. For many, this was shocking. How does a brand this legendary lose over $100 million in just 3 months? But if you looked closer, the seeds of the collapse were planted years ago in Harley's failed attempt to modernize. Why Harley's innovation failed? Harley Davidson saw the writing on the wall. They knew their customer base was aging out, so they did what any struggling company might do. They tried to reinvent themselves. But instead of saving the brand, their innovation attempts only made things worse. The clearest example of this failure was the Livewire, Harley Davidson's first fully electric motorcycle. Launched with massive fanfare in 2019, the Livewire was supposed to usher in a new era for Harley. Instead, it became a symbol of everything wrong with the company's strategy. The Livewire's problems were glaring. First, the price. At launch, the bike cost over $30,000, far beyond what the average young rider could afford. Second, the performance. While the Livewire offered impressive acceleration, it lacked the signature rumble and feel that Harley riders loved. Third, the range. The bike could barely manage 150 miles on a full charge, and charging infrastructure was still lacking in most areas. Instead of attracting a new generation of riders, the Livewire alienated Harley's core customers without winning over millennials or Gen Z. The bike flopped, sales tanked, and Harley quietly spun off Livewire into a separate company in 2021. But the innovation missteps didn't stop there. Harley's attempts to modernize their cruiser and touring lineup with sleeker designs, digital dashboards, and high-tech features only frustrated their loyal riders. The brand that once stood for rugged simplicity was now being accused of trying too hard to be something it wasn't. While Harley floundered, their biggest rival seized the moment. The rise of Indian motorcycles. As Harley Davidson stumbled, Indian motorcycles rose. Owned by Polaris Industries, Indian had been quietly rebuilding its brand for over a decade. But when Harley's financial collapse and customer backlash hit, Indian made its move. While Harley struggled to find new buyers, Indian went straight for Harley's disillusioned base. They focused on what made American motorcycles iconic: classic styling, powerful V-twin engines, and a rider-first experience. And it worked. Indian's market share steadily grew while Harley's declined. They launched models like the Scout and the Chief, affordable, reliable, and unmistakably American. But more importantly, Indian understood that riders wanted authenticity. They didn't try to change the game, they played Harley's game better than Harley. And it wasn't just about design. Indian built a community around their brand, engaging with riders online and at events across the country. They positioned themselves as the real American motorcycle company, while Harley was being dragged through political controversies and corporate blunders. By the end of 2024, Indian was on track to surpass Harley in U.S. market share for the first time in history. Harley Davidson, once the undisputed king of American motorcycles, was now fighting for survival against a rival who understood the game better. But this wasn't the first time Harley faced extinction. They've been here before, and history had a lesson they seemed to forget. Harley's AMF-era near-death experience. Harley Davidson's current crisis might seem unprecedented, but it's not the first time the brand has stood on the edge of collapse. In fact, back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Harley Davidson came dangerously close to disappearing forever. And it wasn't tariffs, politics, or even competition that almost killed them. It was their own corporate ownership. When American Machine and Foundry, better known as AMF, took control of Harley Davidson in 1969, it was supposed to be a turning point. Instead, it became one of the darkest periods in Harley's history. AMF's strategy was simple: ramp up production and maximize profits. But they did it at the expense of quality, community, and craftsmanship. Under AMF, production skyrocketed, but so did complaints. The bikes rolled off the assembly line faster than ever, but corners were cut everywhere. Harley's iconic reputation started to crumble. By the late 1970s, the term Harley was associated more with breakdowns than freedom. Sales plummeted, customers walked away, and Japanese manufacturers like Honda, Yamaha, and Kawasaki stepped in with better-built, more reliable, and more affordable motorcycles. By 1981, Harley Davidson's market share in the heavyweight motorcycle segment had fallen to a dismal 23%, down from 75% in the 1960s. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. It wasn't until a group of Harley executives staged a buyout from AMF in 1981, reclaiming the company's independence, that Harley had a chance to recover. But it wasn't enough. Harley still needed help, and that help came from an unlikely place: the White House. The Reagan tariff that saved Harley. Harley Davidson's rescue came in the form of a presidential intervention. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan approved a bold, controversial move, a 25% tariff on imported heavyweight motorcycles over 700 cubic centimeters. The goal was simple: give Harley Davidson breathing room. The company was drowning in cheap Japanese imports and had no chance to compete. Reagan's tariff created a protective bubble, slowing the flood of foreign motorcycles and giving Harley time to fix its business. And Harley took full advantage. The company didn't just rest on political protection. Instead, it used the opportunity to overhaul its manufacturing process, invest in quality, and reconnect with its core audience. New leadership focused on American craftsmanship, the iconic V-twin engine, and the rebellious image that had defined the brand since World War II. By 1987, Harley had regained its footing and voluntarily asked the Reagan administration to lift the tariff 2 years early. That's how confident they were in their recovery. Harley Davidson survived its AAMF-era near-death experience because of a combination of government protection, internal reform, and cultural reconnection. But here's the catch: that playbook won't work today. Why Reagan's playbook won't work today? The strategy that saved Harley Davidson in the 1980s simply can't be repeated in 2025. The world has changed too much, and Harley's current problems go far deeper than foreign competition. First, the global economy is fundamentally different. In Reagan's time, the threat was clear: Japanese manufacturers flooding the American market. A tariff could slow that flood, but today Harley isn't just fighting foreign competitors, they're fighting a shrinking customer base, changing cultural tastes, and the realities of globalization. Even if a president slapped tariffs on imported motorcycles today, it wouldn't fix Harley's core problems. The brand's biggest issue isn't cheap foreign bikes, it's the fact that younger riders aren't interested in buying heavy, expensive cruisers. Harley's average customer is now over 50 years old. The next generation wants lighter, faster, cheaper, and often electric two-wheelers. Second, Harley's manufacturing footprint is global. In the 1980s, the company was still mostly American-made. Today, they rely heavily on international supply chains. Tariffs and trade wars don't just hurt foreign competitors, they drive up costs for Harley too. That's exactly what happened under Trump's tariffs, which punished American companies as much as foreign ones. Finally, there's the cultural shift. In the 80s, Harley Davidson was able to reconnect with American riders by leaning into patriotism and rebellion. But in 2025, that message isn't resonating. Harley tried to modernize, focus on electric motorcycles, and appeal to a broader demographic, but in the process, they alienated their core audience. The playbook that worked in 1983 won't work now, and the fallout of the trade war has made that crystal clear. The trade war fallout across America. Harley Davidson's collapse under Trump's trade war isn't just a motorcycle story. It's a snapshot of a much bigger problem facing American manufacturing. When Donald Trump imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other imported goods, the goal was to protect American jobs and bring manufacturing back home. But the reality has been far messier. The tariffs triggered retaliatory measures from other countries, especially the European Union, which slapped a 25% tariff on American motorcycles. For Harley Davidson, that meant losing access to one of its biggest export markets. Every bike shipped to Europe became thousands of dollars more expensive overnight. To survive, Harley had no choice but to move production of European-bound bikes overseas. That decision wasn't about disloyalty, it was about economic survival. But the impact didn't stop with Harley. Farmers lost billions in exports. Iconic American brands like Jack Daniel's whiskey saw their European sales plummet. Even the U.S. auto industry struggled with higher steel and aluminum costs. The trade war created a ripple effect that punished American companies, workers, and consumers. And while Trump promised to make America great again, the reality was that many of America's most iconic industries, including Harley Davidson, were paying the price. The lesson here is clear. Trade wars don't happen in a vacuum. They have real consequences for real people. And Harley Davidson's struggle is just one chapter in a much larger story of economic tension, global competition, and the unintended fallout of political decisions. But Harley's biggest fight isn't with politicians or foreign competitors, it's with something much more personal and much harder to fix: Harley's identity crisis. For over 100 years, Harley wasn't just selling motorcycles, it was selling a lifestyle. The roaring engines, the chrome, the leather, the brotherhood, it all meant something. But somewhere along the way, Harley Davidson forgot who it was. The trouble started when Harley tried to modernize, but in doing so, it alienated the very riders who built its empire. Instead of focusing on the working-class men and women who had saved for years to buy their first Harley, the company chased a global audience: urban professionals, overseas markets, eco-conscious millennials. They launched electric motorcycles, pushed corporate sustainability campaigns, and leaned heavily into globalist branding strategies. But the people who bought Harley motorcycles didn't want corporate gloss or politically correct messaging. They wanted American iron, roaring pipes, and a brand that reflected their values. Harley's attempt to be everything to everyone left them with nothing. The brand's cultural core, blue-collar riders, veterans, small-town bikers, felt abandoned. And the new audiences Harley tried to win over, they weren't interested. Younger riders wanted affordable, fuel-efficient, digital-first motorcycles, not $30,000 cruisers with a logo they no longer identified with. The very attempt to expand Harley's brand killed what made it special. But the worst part? Harley never needed to change that much. Their riders didn't want Harley to evolve or diversify in the corporate sense. They wanted Harley to double down on who it was. Instead, the company tried to be something it wasn't. And that's why it's collapsing culturally, not just financially. And now Harley is facing a brutal reality. If they don't find their identity again, it won't matter how many bikes they sell overseas or how modern their electric lineup becomes. While Harley's identity crisis is at the heart of its collapse, the question everyone's asking now is whether the brand can actually be saved or if the damage is already done. But before we find out, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you like this video so far. Can Harley be saved? Harley Davidson's path to survival is not impossible, but it's going to be painful. There is no easy fix, no magic product launch, no globalist strategy that will turn this ship around. If Harley wants to survive, it needs to make the toughest choices in its 120-year history. First, they have to lower prices. Harley cannot afford to be the luxury bike brand anymore, not when its core customer base is working-class Americans who are getting squeezed by inflation, rising interest rates, and stagnant wages. A Harley Davidson motorcycle used to be attainable. Today, a fully loaded touring bike costs over $35,000, and even the entry-level models start around $16,000. Harley has to stop pricing out the very people who built the brand. Second, Harley must cut the corporate fat. Too much of the company's resources are being spent on initiatives that don't sell motorcycles, global marketing campaigns, unnecessary bureaucracy, meaningless corporate activism. That money needs to go back into improving build quality, reducing prices, and supporting dealerships that are struggling to survive. Third, Harley has to stop chasing the globalist dream. Expanding into Europe, Asia, and South America sounds good on paper, but the brand's identity has always been American. The more Harley tries to be an international luxury brand, the more it loses what made it iconic. And finally, Harley needs to reconnect with its community. For decades, Harley Davidson built one of the strongest brand communities in the world. HOG chapters, local rallies, cross-country rides, they were all part of something bigger. That community is still out there, but they're tired of being ignored. Harley has to show them they matter again. But here's the truth. None of this will be easy. Lowering prices means lower profits, at least in the short term. Cutting corporate fat means layoffs and restructuring. Ditching the globalist strategy means walking away from markets they've invested millions in. And rebuilding trust with their core audience means swallowing a lot of corporate pride. The question is, will Harley have the courage to make these hard choices? Because if they don't, the next chapter of this story will not be written by Harley Davidson. It will be written by the people who watched the brand die. And if Harley fails to make those choices, the consequences won't just be felt by bikers, it will send shockwaves through American culture itself. The day Harley dies, America changes forever. If Harley Davidson collapses, it's not just a company that disappears, it's an entire American dream. The fall of Harley would be a cultural earthquake with consequences that ripple far beyond the motorcycle industry. First, the economic impact would be devastating. Thousands of American jobs would vanish overnight. Factory workers, dealership staff, suppliers, small-town mechanics who rely on Harley's ecosystem. Entire communities, particularly in the Midwest and Rust Belt, would lose one of their last remaining symbols of American manufacturing. For many of these towns, Harley Davidson isn't just a company, it's a lifeline. Dealerships across the country would close their doors. Independent dealerships, already struggling to survive in an era of declining sales and corporate overreach, would be the first to go. But even large dealership chains would not be immune. The collapse of Harley Davidson would drag the entire motorcycle retail industry down with it. And then there's the cultural loss. Harley Davidson is more than a motorcycle brand, it's a piece of American history, a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and working-class pride. The brand has been immortalized in movies, music, and pop culture for over 100 years. Losing Harley Davidson would be like losing Levi's jeans or Ford trucks. But perhaps the most tragic consequence would be what Harley's collapse says about American manufacturing itself. If one of the most recognizable, most patriotic, most culturally significant American brands can't survive globalization and corporate greed, what hope is there for the rest of American industry? Because Harley Davidson's struggle is not unique. It's a symptom of a much larger disease, a system that values short-term profits over long-term loyalty, corporate expansion over community roots, and global prestige over local pride. But what do you think? Is Harley too far gone, or can they make one last ride back to the top? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, check out the other videos on the channel, and don't forget to like and subscribe.